Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode here at Catholic Table Talk Podcast. This is the podcast where everything Catholic is on the table. I want to thank you again for joining me this week, wherever you're listening or watching to the show on all of our platforms. If you don't know which platforms we're on specifically, please look down the description and follow the links to all of our platforms. Today we're going to talk about kind of Spain in the New World. So we're going to talk about Christopher Columbus since it's October, and we're going to talk about the discovery of America and kind of the Catholic side of that too. So we have a great guest. Before we get to that though, if you have any speaker or show topics while I was talking about that, email us at catholictt@gmail.com. Again, it's catholictt@gmail.com, the official email of Catholic Table Talk. We'd love to hear from you from show and speaker requests. So let's introduce today's speaker. He has a BA in European History from Ave Maria University and a certificate certificate in secondary education through Mandona University. He taught history and scripture for St. Augustine Homeschool Enrichment Program for 10 years. He is the author of the popular Story of Civilization series by Tam Books. He recently joined the Catholic History Textbook Project, as well as he is a star of the YouTube sensational History and a Man. So he knows his history and he knows his scripture, and we love to have him on. We're happy to have him on the first time, making his Catholic Table Talk debut. Homeschool Connections teacher as well, Mr. Phillip Campbell. So, Phillip, thank you again for taking the time and coming on the show.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to chatting about some history.
Awesome. And I know a lot of people are really interested in this because just recently I concluded the series, the myth of the Crusaders, at some common objections, as well as the Spanish Inquisition. So
Right.
with so this kind of fits in with that a little bit. Kind of another category, I guess you could put it in. So let's dive right into it and just kind of give us a brief history of Christopher Columbus and then the discovery of America.
Well, Christopher Columbus, as most people probably know, was a Genoese. His real name was Cristobal Colomb. He was an Italian, and he came from a middle class background. Went into navigation relatively early on. He was very well traveled. He'd been all over the known world. He'd been to Iceland. He was a very skilled navigator. And at the time of Christopher Columbus's life, which is the late 1400s, all the European countries were looking for the most efficient route to get to the East Indies, which is like Southeast Asia, like the Molucca Islands, the Spice Islands, Borneo, this area, because of the spice trade, because spices were in such high demand for their preservative qualities, and they were a status symbol amongst the wealthy and so on. And of course, in the old days, people used to get east by going over land, like Marco Polo in the 13th century went to China over land. But by the 14th century, this was increasingly difficult due to warfare in the Middle East, due to the hostility of the Ottoman Turks of wanting to monopolize the trade routes. And so Europeans were looking for more efficient ways to get there. The Portuguese had taken the lead here with their expeditions around the coast of Africa under Bernal Diaz, finding a way to get east by going that way. Of course, that's still very long. I mean, that was a 2-year round trip. So Columbus had this idea based on reading the ancient authorities, the Roman authorities, and the geographers, that the Earth was actually smaller than what most people assumed. Now, everyone already knew the world was round. There was this old myth that people thought the world was flat, and Columbus knew it was round, but that's not true. Almost all medieval people knew the world was round. Columbus's theory wasn't that the world was round, but that the world was smaller than what was previously believed. And he had some various reasons why he thought this, based on his calculations of ancient Greek and Roman authors, based on some scriptural interpretation. But the long and short of it was he believed that it might be shorter to get to Asia by going west across the Atlantic. Now, this had never been tried because the Atlantic was believed to be very big. Um, and that it would not be possible. Most navigation in Columbus's day, people stayed close to the shore. They didn't go out in open in the open ocean. They hugged the coast. So
Right.
it was believed that to go off across the ocean would be certain death, that you would starve to death before you possibly reach land. But Columbus thought that Asia was roughly where America is now. And of course, the amusing thing about his theory is both how right he was and how wrong he was. He was dead wrong about the size of the Earth, about where Asia was. But he was correct in that, of course, there is a continent over there, right where he thought that Asia should be. There is land over there, and that you could get there by following certain currents. Columbus was very lucky in that when he left on his expedition in I think it was August of 1492, that he pretty much was able to take a current that is still used today for traveling from Europe down to the Caribbean. So he pitches this idea to the Portuguese. They don't like it, and he pitches it to the King of Spain and the Queen of Spain, Ferdinand Isabella. They don't like it, and he spends years pitching this idea. It's only in 1492, with the fall of the Muslim state of Granada in Spain, the ejection of the last Muslims out of the Iberian Peninsula. Ferdinand and Isabella are in a good mood because they had just successfully concluded the Reconquista, and Columbus approaches them, and it's like when you ask your parents for something when they're in a good mood,
Right. Oh yeah.
So he does that, and they finally grant him the ships and the permission to go, and so he gets his three ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. But it's very difficult to find recruits to go on this voyage because everybody thinks it's dangerous. And so they have to resort to emptying the prisons around Palos, Spain, which is where he set sail from. So they basically staff his ship with a few of his friends, a few royal officials, and a bunch of convicts who had been told, like, it's either rot in prison or go on this crazy expedition. So that's something to keep in mind, is that he didn't have the highest caliber of crew, when he went, but he sets off, and the crew very early on, they're not happy about it. He has to keep alternate logs. He has to lie about how far they've gone, so the crew, he will tell the crew, oh, we only went 7 leagues today, but in reality we'll travel 20, because he didn't want the crew to know how far out they really were. I mean, Columbus was all in on this. I think he knew that if he didn't find land, they were not going to be able to return. And fortunately, he was correct. In October, they came into the Caribbean and eventually landed in the area of the Bahamas on October of, I think it's the 9th. It's different because they celebrate Columbus Day on a different day than the actual discovery was. They always move Columbus Day to the nearest Monday, but I believe the actual date was October 9th, 1492. And then he will set up his colonial government in Hispaniola, which is modern day Haiti. So that's his first voyage. That's the actual discovery. Now, Columbus had asked for exorbitant demands from the King, Queen of Spain. He'd asked to be governor of all the lands that he discovered, to become an admiral, to become a noble, to have a right to a certain percentage of all the revenue. And to some degree, Ferdinand agreed to all this because his advisors assured him that Columbus would never return alive from this voyage. And so when Columbus did return alive, he found himself suddenly at the head of a vast colonial enterprise. But unfortunately for Columbus, he was a poor administrator. He was a very good explorer, one of the best navigators ever, but he was a very poor governor. And
Yeah.
by the time of by 1500, he was taken back in chains to Spain, based on the accusations of other Spaniards who'd come to live in the colony, that he was mismanaging it, that it was rife with nepotism and cronyism and whatnot. I don't think all of this is true. I think some of this is just calumny from Columbus's enemies, but certainly he was not a gifted administrator. We'll put it at that. He will end up making another voyage for Portugal, and then by the time he dies in the first decade of the 1500s, he's broke and he dies litigating his claims in court. And I never knew he discovered a new continent to his dying day. Still thought that he had landed in Asia.
Right.
So that's the beginning of the Spanish presence in the New World.
All right. Well, I definitely learned a few things like I guess I'll just throw this up there. Pop-up question here. Um, for the court, did you say that he like uh kind of ran across it like by accident? Or is that, or did they know there was like certain court out there?
Did he run across what by accident?
The court that's still used today for the of the sea. I mean the court of the sea that you said.
Oh, the
Yeah,
current. No, no, he didn't know that was there. He
right,
just got lucky. He just did dead reckoning. He went by the stars, and he was just fortunate that that was part of the great. The name of it escapes me, but there's a great current that goes like this, around from Europe down Africa to the Caribbean, and he was just fortunate enough that he found it. Luckily,
right. Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Um,
yeah, you're welcome.
so I guess we'll kind of go into the next question here. A lot of people might ask, like, us this since we're Catholic. Like I said, the Spanish Inquisition was uh when it was in Spain and everything. And
Hmm.
was the New World was when Columbus founded it and he was after, um, like when he was governor, was that was those settlers Catholic, and or do we know if they are or not?
His sailors.
The settlers of the New World.
Oh, the settlers.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Columbus sailing in 1492, and then I believe he died in 1505. So he died 12 years before the Protestant Reformation even began. So everybody that's involved in this project is going to be at least nominally Catholic. Now,
Right.
whether they were sincere Catholics, that's another question, because as I said, a substantial number of these crewmen were convicts who were released from prison.
Right.
I don't know what type of faith they had. Now, for example, though, on his first voyage, uh, one of his ships sank. Santa Maria sank, and then one of his captains ran off with the other ship, and he was forced to take all the crew and pile them onto the small ship. But he didn't have enough supplies to take them all back to Spain, so he created a little fort called Fort Navidad, which is Christmas because it was founded around Christmas. And said, I need, so many people to stay behind. I think it was 20 or 30 men. He said, I don't have room for you. You have to stay behind. And he left these 20 or 30 men back and said, I'll be back next year with supplies and to pick you up. Well, these men that he left behind were entirely massacred by the natives. Columbus had good relations with the natives, but from what we understand happened, these people he left behind were so poorly behaved. They were demanding over the natives, kind of lording their authority over them, insisting on being provided for, kind of treating the natives like serfs. And the local Taino got fed up with it and massacred the
Right.
people at Fort La Navidad. So this is something that Columbus in particular is going to deal with over and over again, where he has very good intentions. He's very pious. He's a very sincere Catholic, but the only sorts of people he can find to go with him on these voyages are very rugged and rough around the edges and not inclined to obedience. I mean, you got to imagine, like, the sort of people you find to go on these voyages this time in history, sail to the end of the world, to this place that is full of, from their perspective, savages. You're going to get some tough people that go along that aren't inclined to follow orders, or maybe aren't the most charitable individuals. And Columbus is going to deal with this problem over and over again. So the New World attracts. It's interesting. It attracts some very pious people, like missionaries that want to go and spread the gospel to the natives. It also attracts the most avaricious people who are willing to go to these far off places in search of gold, in search of quick riches, easy wealth. And it attracts, like I said, just rough people, people who like adventure and who thrive in these sorts of situations. So the New World is interesting. It brings out both the best and the worst of Catholic Europe in
Right.
terms of the people it attracts.
Okay. Yeah.
You good
That's it.
question.
Yeah, and I really thank you for that explanation because that really, I like to me at least, I don't know about the listeners, but really to me it clears up a few things. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
So
yeah. If I can say one more thing about that,
yeah,
you'll get people like Catholics who will. The complex thing about understanding the Spanish in the New World is you'll get Catholics or apologists who will say, look, Columbus or a lot of these people, Cortez, like they were very pious people. These missionaries were good. They did good things. They worked, men like Bartolomé de las Casas, the bishop who spent his life defending native. Like these were all good people who did good things, and the Spanish do not deserve their bad reputation. And then you have other people who say, oh, that the Spanish are horrible, like Ojeda fed a bunch of natives to his dogs. This guy enslaved 200 natives and brought them back to Spain. They did all these awful things, and the you got to understand that both of these narratives are correct. Like
right,
they're both correct, and because the New World was a complex place, there's no one narrative that explains all of it. Both of those realities were happening simultaneously. You had the church working to better the lot of natives, to to treat them well, to bring them the faith, to give them a better standard of living and help them. And then you also had people exploiting them. So both of those narratives are true simultaneously. And if we want to take just one side over the other, we're not getting the whole picture.
right. And I mean that's even with uh today's society. I mean you have good people and then you have I mean so yeah, that's true even today. So
Yeah,
um
yeah. If I were to ask you to describe the Catholic Church or America today, it would be true also, right?
right.
Yeah.
So it 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 continues like you say, and the new world, like you say, it brings about a rougher kind of people. Um, I mean, it's just like back in the 1800s, the Wild West. It was just the same thing. It's just a rougher kind of people who lived there. So
Good analogy.
well, I try to, but I'm glad
Yeah.
you enjoy it. Um, so and I mean, today's society, a lot, how do I put this? The next generation, I was put that like that, and more people are not really don't know the history of America. They don't really want to know the history of America. Um, and
Yeah.
just what happened, like I said, what happened with Columbus, what happened to way back when. How can we tell people today in today's society about Christopher Columbus and Spain and the New World and really say, yeah, some of it was good, some of it was bad.
It's really challenging because a lot of people just are closed off to hearing anything other uh than like, oh, Columbus is evil, and like the colonial past is just horrible.
Right,
um I mean, in my experience, the best way to talk to people like this is to not be reflexively defensive about it, to not be like, oh no, he's a hero, like
yeah, right,
like even if you think he is, I think he is. I like Columbus. But when you're arguing with a person who has a different viewpoint, you first have to acknowledge their viewpoint. I mean, they're probably mistaken on certain things. They probably have an over exaggerated view of how bad certain things are. But you have to start by saying, look, I know that the Spaniards weren't perfect by any means. I know there was bad things that happened, but like you said, that's true about society today as well, any culture. And I really just want to understand the truth and not not understand it through like a partisan narrative, you know.
Right.
And I think when you approach it that way, it tends to defuse people's defensiveness when they know like they don't have to fight a battle about, you know, it's not about whether my view of Columbus is right or your view is right. Like, I don't have a vested interest in, you know, defending Columbus. He's not, you know, my dad or something, you
Well,
know.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
I just, you know what I mean? It's not like you're
Yep.
attacking my family member that I have to like defend him no matter what. Uh, Really, we just want to know what the truth is. We want to understand our own history better. And whatever we think about colonialism, it was a fact, and it was instrumental in settling this continent. It's why we're all here. So it's important that we have an accurate view of it. And can we just kind of, you know, talk together to understand the history, the good, the bad, and the ugly? I mean, I think that's the only historically, you know, sound way to view it.
Yep.
And if
Right.
they don't want to talk after that, then forget them, you know.
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's a great way of saying you gotta talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. A lot of people today just want to talk about the good, which is totally fine, but you gotta at least recognize that there was some bad, there was some ugliness. That's just it's a broken world. That's just the way it is. Um, so I guess I would pull this up in there too. From your perspective, Philip, why do you think people today don't really want they don't know about America or they don't really care about the history of it from your, you know, instructor point of view?
Yeah. Well, there's two answers
If I
really.
may ask.
Yeah, of course. That's a good
Okay.
question. There's two answers, and one of them is general, one of them is specific. Number one is that most people just, I don't know, I find that most people don't care about history because they don't find it to be relative to their daily life.
Mhm.
So, unless you find people who are just really curious about the past, like you'll find that the average Joe out there, he's got too much to worry about with just, you know, how he's going to pay the bills and
Right.
whatever. He doesn't have time to be like, oh, you know what I need in my life is a accurate historiographical understanding of Spanish colonialism. You know, they just don't care. But number two is, and I think this is specific to our time, is that history has become um, history has become hijacked to become like a tool of modern politics,
Mhm.
where instead of wanting to learn the history for history's sake, we just want like basically history has become like memes so we can beat up our political opponents with them.
Right.
And and you'll find that, and basically in America particular, you have basically two schools of thought. You have one school of thought that says America's past is bad and it's something we have to come to terms with. And then you have another school of thought that says America's past is something we should be proud of, and that we can, you know, be happy about. And each side will use history as like a club to beat the other side with, you know. And so people don't really care about learning the actual history. They just want to score points, you know, on their opponent, right?
Right.
So you had, if I can draw an example, earlier this year, you had this case in Canada where there was this residential school that was run by Catholic missionaries, where it was announced that they had discovered the bodies of like 200 children that had died at the mission school, presumably from neglect and bad conditions by the missionaries. And of course, those who are hostile to the church's influence in society immediately took this and beat it over the head, you know, to be like, oh, this is just more proof that the church is an awful influence in society. And meanwhile, those who were defending the church were just like, and many of them were like, these schools were fine. This is all, you know, nothing bad happened, which isn't true, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And people, but what was frustrating to me is that people were not interested in actually finding out what really happened. They were wanting to just use whatever that tragedy was to score points. And for example, something that drastically changes the narrative is, at that school, which is called the Kamloops Residential School, there was actually not a single body discovered. What they did was, somebody used a piece of equipment to scan the ground, something like sonar or something where they can, you know, scan the ground from above,
Okay.
and they uncovered 200 uh, spots on the property where it looked like the ground had been disturbed. And they said that these spots could presumably be graves. And if they're graves, they must have been of children. Not a single grave was excavated, not a single bone was found. Now, does that mean that there was not 200 dead children? No, there very well could be, you know.
Right.
Um, but was there definitely dead children? No. And every media outlet that reported that the bodies of children had been found there was simply not telling the truth because they didn't care about the actual research. The fact is, until we get out there and dig up the ground, which hasn't happened yet, nobody knows what that was. But it didn't stop both sides from being like, how can I use this historical event as a bludgeon to hit the other side with, you know?
Right.
And so in the midst of the fight, people don't care about the actual history, which is extremely frustrating to me. And it leaves me in a situation where often I feel like I'm just talking to a wall, you know, where
Yeah.
people don't care. They're kind of like, okay, does this either support or oppose my opinion? You know, history doesn't care about your opinion. History is just what happened. It doesn't care, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so for me, when people try to use history that way, it's extremely frustrating and feels like a perversion of the discipline. And I think particularly in America, because we're very politically polarized, this is one reason why people are not learning the history.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Putting you on the spot right there, but I I appreciate
Sorry if that
that.
answer was too long.
No, it was good. It was good. I didn't
Uh,
know about the whole school thing in Canada, so um, I want to thank you for that because I didn't know about that. So just kind of wrapping up. I usually give this time, Philip, just to hand it over to the guest. Just make any final last remarks, something that you forgot, not remembering you want to throw in. Just kind of last remarks about our episode today.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate the topic, William. I've written and spoken about this topic extensively, and I would like to point your listeners to. I have a series of books.
Sure.
I did not write these books, but I edited them and I wrote introductions to them. I have a series of books called Catholic Heroes and Heroines of America, which are actually by another author named John O'Kane Murray. He was a Catholic historian from the 1800s, and he wrote a series of biographies about the the Spanish explorers, Columbus, Balboa, Ojeda, and Cortez. And I was given this manuscript several last year, and I looked at it and I thought, this is great stuff. And I republished these books, and they're available on Amazon. There's volume 1 is on Columbus, volume 2 on Balboa, volume 3 on Cortez. I have introductions that I've written to each one, kind of explaining a lot of the subjects that we've talked about. So again, those are called Catholic Heroes and Heroines of America, volumes 1, 2, and 3 by John O'Kane Murray, and you can look them up. They're also on my personal website, which is Cruaken Hill Press, cruakenhill.com, and I can give you the link. You can put it in your description. So
Sure.
I'd like to just direct your viewers to those books if you want to learn more about this period.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll put the description up in the I mean, I'll put the link on the description, as I meant to say. So,
Sure, sure.
yeah. So, if someone is touched by today's message, or they want to know more, or if they got kids who think about being homeschooled, or they want to get enrolled in your classes, how do they go about that?
Yeah, well, you can contact Homeschool Connections. Just go online at homeschoolconnections.com. And then you can search by instructor. So you can search Phillip Campbell and see all my classes, or you can search by subject. So you can search history and see what I have available, or you can search by grade. You can search middle school, high school. I have classes for both, mainly high school. So that's how you can look at my classes. If you want to follow my writing or get various updates on what I'm doing, if you're on Facebook, I have a Facebook page called Phillip Campbell Author Teacher that you can follow. And I occasionally post videos on YouTube on my channel, Mr. Campbell Explains. And I do have a whole series of videos on the age of exploration.
Awesome. Okay, I'll provide those links as well in the description. So everyone just go down to the description and find all the links that Philip said. And I highly recommend his classes. Like I said, I was never in a live class, but everyone I talked to on Homeschool Connections absolutely loved their classes, and I did take a couple of recording classes, and I absolutely loved them. So I just want to thank you again, Philip, for coming on today's show, and really greatly appreciate that. Your time and your knowledge of this topic, and hopefully you at home got to listen and maybe learn something today, everyone. And hope to have you back on the show again, Philip. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. That's Phillip Campbell again. If you have kids or know with someone who has kids, go look up his class courses on homeschoolconnections.com. Of course, again, the link will be in the description. Or if you know more or learn more about, like you said, the expeditions, excuse me, discoveries, go find those books, like he said too. So that'll do it for this week. Thank you again for your time this week, everyone, and we'll see you back here again next week, God willing, same time, same platform on Catholic Table Talk Podcast, the podcast where everything Catholic is on the table.